Hello, honeys. Welcome to the middle of October. Can't believe we're already here at this point in the year and in the month. Seems like time just flew through 2024. I'm very happy to say I had that tens tournament with my lovely, lovely Phoenix women's rugby team this weekend in Flagstaff, and we were able to submit 2 sides, aka an A and a B team, for this tournament for the first time ever. So huge round of applause for us making it happen, getting women into sports. We love to see the empowerment. And also, we did pretty dang well, all things considered, for so many of us being new to each other and the competition being fierce. Anyways, though, back to the reason we're all here, your handpicked headlines. This last week did not have a whole lot going on in the arts news, but what stories there were pretty fascinating. So let's dive in. Here we go, honeys. Starting as we typically do with our follow-ups. We saw the most recent protest action undertaken against the Noguchi Museum by 2 LA-based artists who placed a keffiyeh on sculptures of Noguchis across the city. In past Beesnesses, we have covered other responses to the Noguchi Museum's controversial decision to enforce its new staff dress code policy that essentially bans keffiyehs. We talked about employee petitions and protests, as well as the decline of a museum award by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Jhumpa Lahiri. So you can see that this is an escalating issue across the arts world, this policy. The actions we're talking about today, however, were undertaken by David Horvitz and Ali Eyal. On Thursday, they visited California Scenario, a public sculpture garden in Costa Mesa designed by Noguchi, and then went on to UCLA's Franklin D. Murphy Sculpture Garden, home to Noguchi's Garden Elements of 1962. While at each location, they placed a keffiyeh, which is the sole remnant of Eyal's father, on top of various Noguchi artworks and/or the sites of ones not currently on display. This is notable because that garment has traveled the world with the artist. Our source article in Hyperallergic pointed out they were careful not to touch the art itself when staging these photos out of respect for both Noguchi's work as well as Eyal's keffiyeh. Eyal inherited the garment from his father when the Iraqi-born artist was a boy and his father disappeared, abducted by a militia in 2006. Unfortunately, his father has never been returned. The most important, arguably, part of the story here is, of course, the why. First, why we care, of course. Further development in this story generated some headlines, but also why they did it. Horvitz and Eyal wanted to send a message of both protest as well as solidarity. Said Eyal, quote, "This is the right thing to do with this piece of fabric, to give it a voice and meaning to show support for Palestine. It's an amazing thing to add to the history of the keffiyeh," end quote. Horvitz himself has several biographical parallels with Noguchi. Both are LA-born artists with one parent of Japanese heritage, and Horvitz's own maternal grandparents were imprisoned in Japanese concentration camps during World War II. In fact, his grandfather was in the same camp as Noguchi himself. Overall, I think I'm continuing to have us follow this story because I'm curious to see how loud the protests have to get, exactly who has to speak up and in how many ways, because now we've seen employees, authors, artists. What's it going to take for this dress code policy to get rescinded? Because clearly the issue is not going away. Switching gears to follow the money for a minute here, the first story to catch our eye was that the sale of late California Senator Dianne Feinstein's collection fetched a record-breaking $1.85 million. The auction, taking place on October 8th in LA at Bonhams, was titled Legacy of a Stateswoman. The 278 items available were made up of American and Chinese art, jewelry, historic photographs, furniture, even a drawing made by the politician herself, and everything brought in almost double what the auction house predicted. So why we care? Feinstein was a legend in terms of political tenure, activism, etc., but she was also one of the richest lawmakers in the U.S. on her death, with a reported $69.4 million net worth. So this means that this is a very high taste, high value collection in the first place, which is very exciting. But even more than her monetary legacy, the success of this auction, in the words of one of the auction house deputy chairmen, is a testament to the profound influence that Senator Feinstein had in her home state of California, end quote. The evidence speaks for itself here, as Bonham says that they received the most registrations for a U.S. sale with this one, presumably ever, and that the majority of those bidders were Californians. Our eye was also caught by headlines announcing the first auction solely dedicated to the works of French sculptor Francois Lalande, especially as it was made possible by his daughter Dorothy. The sale featured 70 animal sculptures that ranged from larger than a standard person to fit in your palm. The sale was even more successful than predicted, with all of the works selling and 97% of them blowing past their high estimates on that October 10th Christie's night. Now, as I mentioned, we care in part because this is Lalande's first sole auction, and it performed so well. So the entire event shows us how markets can fluctuate in real time based on a given artist's growing or falling popularity and respect, especially because Lalande has recently been seeing new celebration for his, quote, fusing of the worlds of fine art and high-end design in sculptural works that boast a utilitarian function, end quote. That's likely why we saw such success. For example, we can look to Trigon Centaur of 2001 that previously stood guard over Rockefeller Plaza entrance. It sold for $7.5 million, despite its high estimate being $1.2 million. We also care a little bit because there was this fascinating public display element to this. Dorothy Lalande collaborated with French fashion designer Simon Porte-Jacquemus to make a 6-day entire Christie's ground floor exhibition celebrating the impact and legacy of her father's work. This likely also drummed up excitement and thus higher prices at the auction. We also saw an unexpected but hilarious endorsement come for presidential candidate Kamala Harris from the Guerilla Girls in the form of a new poster. If you're unfamiliar with the Guerilla Girls, they're an anonymous feminist art activist group that first started getting attention in 1985 from the art world and the public alike for their political poster campaigns, as well as projection actions, which frequently call out widespread gender inequality in the art world. The members always appear wearing gorilla masks and never use their own names. They always identify by the name of a famous deceased woman artist. They made their official announcement of hopping on the bandwagon on October 10th, releasing a new election poster encouraging people to vote democratically. The poster itself expands upon a previous one from 2023 that says, quote, "It's not apple pie without ice cream. It's not democracy without feminism," end quote. These phrases, as well as the words feminism equals democracy, equality, and justice for all, are superimposed onto the image of a slightly ajar pie box. This time, the Guerilla Girls added to that poster, "Vote Harris Waltz in order to restore and defend our freedoms," end quote, below the illustration. Why we care about this? In part because the image is free to download, so clearly the Guerilla Girls care much more about spreading the message than copyright, which forms an interesting contrast to our AI art episode. But a bit more specifically, although the Guerilla Girls have criticized sitting and or past presidents before, they've never actually endorsed a candidate in this way. This shows how seriously the feminist group is considering this election. In fact, in response to Hyperallergic's request for comments, they say that a member of the group simply wrote them back, quote, "Vote like your freedoms depend on it because they do," end quote. And next up, honeys, a hilarious headline, a story as old as time. We've seen it before, and there was another incident last week. A museum worker threw art in the trash by mistake. This particular one was titled "All the Good Times We Spent Together" from 2017. It's acrylic painted aluminum replicas of Jupiler beer cans meant to symbolize cherished memory moments spent with friends. The pieces in question were created by French artist Alexandre Lavette and were placed on top of the glass elevator cars to be able to be seen but not touched. Unfortunately, as we can kind of guess, somebody didn't get the memo. A technician working at the LAM Museum in the Dutch town of Lies was the one who threw them away, not being a regular elevator tech and not knowing what was up. Thankfully, the works were recovered from the garbage bag just seconds before being thrown away forever. They were cleaned and moved to a new display area. So why we care? Of course, there's immediate questions about legal consequences, but hooray, no charges. Says Hyperallergic, quote, "The museum clarified that it bears no ill will towards the substitute technician who made the mistake, with museum director Setsky Van Zenten noting that he was just doing his job in good faith," end quote. We also care about this story because it has a twist to it. Whereas past instances of food-like trash artwork getting thrown away occurred in fine arts institutions across the globe, places like the Whitney, the Met, places you wouldn't expect to find that sort of work. This occurred in exactly the sort of place you should expect to find that work. The LAM Museum is a contemporary art one whose collection is devoted to food and drink related artworks. So we have a whole lot more nuance this time when we ask what is art, what is not, given this atypical context, this unusual setting. Last week also saw the arrest of 2 members of the British activism group Youth Demand after they posted a picture from Gaza across a Picasso painting at the UK National Gallery. The incident occurred in London on October 9th. The poster itself is made up of a photo taken by Palestinian journalist Ali Jadala during the Israeli airstrikes on Al-Shifa Hospital in March. It features a Gazan mother sobbing and holding her young son whose face is covered with blood. Almost immediately, security got on them and ripped them away from the art, yanked this poster down, started to detain them within the gallery, while Halai started chanting Free Palestine and being dragged away. Rosenfeld was still in the gallery, dumping paint onto the floor. A spokesperson for the National Gallery confirmed to Hyperallergic that once police arrived on the scene, they apprehended and arrested the pair, but that there were no permanent damages sustained to the painting, its frame, or the floors, and the room was able to reopen to the public shortly after the incident, after it was cleaned. We're discussing this story today because of context and why they did it. First, context. Many Brits have not particularly been happy with responses from British Defense Secretary John Healey lately in regards to an arms embargo on Israel. Very, very recently, I wasn't able to get an exact date, Healey rejected French President Emmanuel Macron's call for an embargo, saying, quote, "No, we work a different system," end quote. And I bring up the general unhappiness of the British public because it is, in part, what Halai and Rosenfeld attribute their actions to. Rosenfeld, in an explanatory video statement, said that he did it, quote, "because as a Jew, I feel like it's my duty to call out the genocide being committed in Gaza. I want the world to know this isn't in the Jewish name, and I want to see a free Palestine." When Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Britain stands with Israel, he's wrong. We know very well that this is a genocide, not self-defense, and we as the people of Britain say enough is enough, end quote. What lies ahead for the pair legally is yet to be seen. However, they are in their early 20s, so maybe the courts will take their youth into some account. And our last story, something a little happier in tone to bring us back up, is that Han Kang has become the first South Korean author to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Yes, I know that's the written arts, and we typically talk visual arts, but hear me out because this is important. Best known for her book, The Vegetarian, the novelist and poet is often praised, says the Smithsonian, for, quote, her intense poetic praise that confronts historical traumas and exposes the fragility of human life, end quote. Han became the first Korean author prior to this, in 2016, to win the International Booker Prize for an English translation of that book, The Vegetarian. In 2018, she was shortlisted for another Booker Prize, the one for Human Acts. The Swedish Academy made this Nobel Prize in Literature announcement Thursday morning. We can only imagine that Han was over the moon. Now, as I said, we care because she's the first writer from South Korea to receive this incredibly prestigious award. Nobel Literature Prize winners receive a cash prize of about $1 million, as well as an expected spike in publicity and book sales based on, what has historically happened with winners. And all of this together means that there will be greater attention on and thus likely increased visibility as well as funding for Korean literature on a global scale. And that can only be a good thing for the arts. All right, honeys, that is our show for the day. Hope you enjoyed your weekly Beesness. Hope it got you buzzing and every other sweet pun I can try and think of off the fly. Wow, I am a Midwestern dad at my heart, aren't I? Anyways, that's enough puns based on the highbrow honey name. I'll let you be. Oh, damn. Okay, now I'm done. Take care, hydrate or dihydrate, and talk to you honeys soon. This podcast and this episode were created, produced, hosted, and researched, as well as fact-checked by yours truly, Celia Bugno. It was edited by our brand new sound engineer and producer of our intro music, Chris Meinhold. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on all of your favorite streaming platforms as well as your social medias.